Hi, this is Joe. In this video, we're going to be cleaning and reassembling the steering head for the 2014 GSXR 750. So we have some bearings here, we have the steering head, and we have some washers and nuts. So let's start cleaning, and then I'll show you how we're going to actually do the reassembly and adjustment of the steering head. Now that we have all the parts cleaned, we can now go ahead and pack the bearings, and then we can start assembling the steering head onto the frame. If you've never packed bearings, it's always fun. Get yourself a dab of grease, put it in your hand, and then take your bearing and make sure the grease actually gets forced through the bearing, not around the outside, but through the center of the bearing surface. After you pack the bearings, and you want to rub some grease all around the outside of the bearings. Normally what I do is do a second pass and then make sure we get enough grease into the bearing surfaces. Now we can take the bearing, we can put it on the stem, and we want the bevel, the shallow edge of the bevel, to point up, because the bearing is going to fit into the race on the bottom part of the frame. I'll pack the other bearing off camera, and then we'll start assembling the bearing stem into the frame. Now we can take some bearing grease and we can rub it around the race at the top, and the bottom. We can now take the steering head with the bearing, we can insert it up through the frame. We can take the bearing and put it large end up. We can then put the upper bearing race on. Then we can take the top dust seal, put that on like that, and then there's a metal cover that goes on the top, and then we can put the adjuster nut on the top, and this will hold the steering head in place. until we can finish the assembly. And we're moving it back and forth the full width, and we're checking the play. And then later, after we get everything on, then we'll do an adjustment. So let's go ahead and get the other components now. Now what we're going to do is install. There's a lock washer here, and there's a slot in the stem. We're going to slide that on, and then we're going to put the lock nut on top. But we're not going to tighten it all the way. What we're going to do is we're going to do an adjustment first. So for the time being, we're just going to loosely put the lock nut on. And then we're going to follow the instructions on how to adjust the steering head. And then later we will finish the assembly on the steering head, including putting the top clamp on with the ignition key and the forks. But for now, that will be all of the assembly for now, and we'll continue on here in a bit. We're going to adjust the steering head and make sure we have enough tension on the bearings. First of all, and I'm going to use a C-spanner wrench here. The socket wrench for this nut up here is $100. So we're not going to purchase one of those. That's a bit too much. First thing we want to do is tighten this to 45 Newton meters. And of course, I can't measure that, so I'm just going to tighten it pretty snug. Then it says to pivot this 4 or 5 times to seat the bearings. So we're going to seat the bearings. Then it says back it off 1/4 to 1/2 turn. And what I found is I'm going to back it off so there's a tiny bit of play in the steering head, and then I'm going to tighten it back up just a teeny bit until that play goes away. And there, that seems to be snug. And then there's a test. When the forks and the wheel is on, you can put a gram scale on the handlebars and you can measure the pull of the handlebars. But since we don't have the forks or anything mounted yet, this will be good enough for the time being. There's no play, and we're just a very tiny, about 1/16 of a turn from where there's a little bit of play in the steering head. So that is good enough for now. So I'm going to end this video at this point. Later on in the process of reassembling, when we get the top triple clamp on the forks and the wheels, then we will go ahead and do a proper pull test on the handlebars. In the next video, we're going to start assembling the swing arm onto the frame. So hope you enjoyed the video. We'll see you next time.